call this regular meeting of Lane County Board of Commissioners to order for Tuesday, July 10th, 2018. And I'd like to note up front that Commissioner Williams is excused today for having a little bit of eye surgery, I think, today. So first item of business is adjustments to the agenda. Any adjustments to the agenda? Commissioner Sorensen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Two items. One is I do have a lunch meeting today at noon, so I'd like to take off probably 5 till, and if someone's talking and I leave, it's not a reflection on whatever they're saying at the moment I'm leaving. And secondly, I wanted to have I just want to make a brief comment on the item C1 on the consent calendar. That's the Order 18-7-10-4, which is the Administrative Services Agreement and Stop Loss Insurance with Pacific Source. I don't need any staff presentation. I will be voting for it, but I just want to make some comments on it.
Okay, so we want to pull item 5C1 from the consent calendar.
Yeah.
Okay, and staff's listening. You said you don't need staff, so they don't need to rush down here. We'll address that after the consent calendar then. Any other adjustments to the agenda? Seeing none, then we'll move on to item 2, which is public comment. And this is where folks get 3 minutes to address the board. And I've got several people signed up, so I will call the first person and the second person who is on deck. And if you want to come up and state your name and where you're from for the record, and then I will start your 3-minute timer at that point. So the first person to speak is Tom Wright, followed by Mona Lindstromberg.
Good morning. My name is Tom Wright. I live in the county, but it's a Eugene address. I own Wright Lumber. We're a local manufacturing company. Been in business 20 years. Remanufacture lumber items. We have a space in Springfield right now. We employ 23 people, a payroll of over $700,000, and we have the potential to add up to potentially 10 more employees given a good location. Our lease is up, and we need to be out of our current location December 31st. As we know, suitable industrial manufacturing space in Lane County is extremely hard to find, and I've not been able to locate anything. So I've got 23 people and their families looking to me to find a new home. But I think I found a new home, and that's in Dexter. County owns some rural industrial property in Dexter that was repossessed about a year ago. The property is suitable for my needs. It's zoned properly. It would be a perfect fit for me. On 7/3, I submitted a proposal to Commissioner Williams and Jeff Turk to lease purchase the property at the address 38534 Dexter Road. We would put 23 jobs in Dexter. These positions, we source local lumber from local sawmills, and we reprocess it for items shipped to California, primarily used in the agricultural market down there. December 31st is just around the corner for me, so I'm under a tremendous amount of pressure to keep my business open, to keep these jobs, these people employed. Without a good location, then I probably will have to step back from this portion of Wright Lumber. So I ask the board to review my proposal and to respond as soon as possible, because time is definitely of the essence. So I do have a handout for the board. It's okay to hand this to you now at this point. Just kind of some background of Wright, and it does include my very general proposal, because the property does have some issues, but I think they all be certainly able financially to do so.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. And by handing this to the board, it now becomes public information, just so you realize that it will
I would like to then take one back.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
The second one. This is me.
Okay.
I think. Thank you.
I just want to make sure you understand.
No, you're not. Thank you for that comment.
Yeah.
But it is in county hands with council.
Yeah. But if you hand it to us in a public meeting, it has to be posted as what was handed to us, so.
Yeah, I got it. Okay, thanks for your time.
All right, so Mona Lynchtenberg, followed by John White.
Good morning. My name's Mona Lindstenberg. I live at 831 East Buck Creek Road, Tidewater. This is regarding the elect not to hear appeal, a proposed increase. My last time here was November 2016. My comment then was on the appeal fee, requesting the Board of Commissioners elect not to hear an appeal fee that then could go directly to the Land Use Board of Appeals. This is a very important public issue, so I am back again. I personally have been through the appeals process, a process that can be daunting in the complexity of land use code regulations, timelines, and cost. Maintaining the current fee of $250 to elect not to hear makes the process more accessible to the public financially and in expediting a potential final review process. In 2016, there was discussion about changing the current labor-intensive structure of preparing for both an appeal and the elect not to hear option. At that time, it was explained how the elect not to hear could be tailored as a consent calendar item. It made sense then, and possibly in the interim, there has been more thought in how this could be accomplished. Thank you for the opportunity to comment. I am encouraged that there is a way to continue serving the public as regarding electing not to hear fee, and hopefully freeing up staff to better focus on ongoing land use issues and code updates. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. John White, followed by William Dunham.
Morning. John White from the Cresswell area. I want to direct my comments to the elect to hear and the fee to appeal also. I want to say that I'm really appreciative of the fact that I live in a country and a state and a county where I can participate in governance to a limited degree anyway, voting, making comments here, and also going through an appeals process, which I did a couple of years ago. The board did want to hear the appeal, so it went to the board, and then it went back to a hearings official meeting again, and then it went on to LUBA. By the time it was over, we had spent more than a year in the process. Our bills came to something like over $12,000. That was just our side, had nothing to do with LMD or the other side, which seemed like a lot of money and a lot of time to me to be spent on that. So I'm all for keeping the appeals process efficient, but I would like to see it streamlined as much as possible. Also, keeping the fee low, I think, is important. The elect not to hear fee. I think it's important to keep frivolous lawsuits out of the system if you can, but $250 seems to be enough to make most people think at least twice before they're going to file an appeal, and that's just getting your foot in the door. There's going to be a lot more expenses, a lot more time. So I think it's well worth taxpayer money to subsidize that fee so that participation in our democracy stays high, and the education of the public also is increased. I know it was an incredible learning experience for me to be part of the process, to see how LMD worked, the board works a bit, codes, all that sort of thing. So I encourage you to consider streamlining the process and keeping the fee low. Thank you.
Thank you. So William Dunham, followed by Lori Siegel.
Good morning, Commissioners. My name is William Dunham. I live at 763 Muriu in Eugene, 97404. My wife and I own two properties in Lane County, one on River Road area and one in Elmira. I'm here this morning representing both me and my wife to oppose a proposed fee increase from $250 to $950. First, it puts those of us with unlimited resources who are often opposing developers and their well-vetted attorneys and experts even more of a disadvantage than we are now. Believe me, it's difficult enough as it is. We don't need more obstacles than we already have in place. I have to try to decipher and understand Lane County's land laws and try to participate in the process. But if that's your intent of this fee increase, it does a great job. That's a lot of money for most of us, and especially knowing the odds of winning an appeal, it undoubtedly will be a deterrent to many. We both support retaining the current fee at $250 and believe that Land Watch's proposals before the commissioners are relevant. Thanks for your time.
Thank you. Lori Siegel, followed by J.H. McRaven.
Hello, Commissioners. I'm Lori Siegel, and I'm here on behalf of Land Watch today. I just wanted to make a few comments about the staff memo that before you today for the elect not to hear fee increase proposal. I just wanted to provide a little bit of context. The memo makes the point that there's been an increase in elect not to hear appeals and appeals generally. However, what the memo doesn't say is that the number of applications and processing of applications and approvals of applications or decisions on applications has also increased at a very rapid rate. So the number of dwelling approvals on forest land has increased every year from 2012 to 2015. In 2014, there were 39 approvals for dwellings on forest land. In 2015, there were 66. Together, that was 105 in 2 years. That far exceeds the number of dwellings that are approved in other counties during the same period. There's other issues that are also lead to these dwelling approvals that get appealed, which are legal lot verifications and property line adjustments, and there's in the same period that I just discussed, 2012 to 2015, there were 200 ministerial property line adjustments. Those are the kind without notice. There were 45 property line adjustments with concurrent legal lot verifications, so that additional. So these are large numbers of applications, and so large numbers of applications will result in appeals. However, appeals are a very small percentage of what land management does. By the time the elect not to hear gets to you, everything's done already. The decisions are made, the findings are written, all the characteristics of the property are expressed in writing. So by the time it gets to you, it's just a matter of being able to have you adopt that decision as your own, so you retain the deference that you're due according to state law. That deference allows you to interpret your own code. The hearing official interprets your code the way the county expects that to be done. I also wanted to point out that the LMD commissioned a small cost study in 2015, and it looked at 2014 costs and cost recovery. And the consultant in that study, the study has many, many pages, so I'm not going to bother you with that, but one of the points that was already made in the cost recovery statement from the consultant under the policy section, I'll quote it. If an activity has a public benefit, it might more appropriately be supported by taxes. Conversely, if an activity has mostly a private benefit, it might more appropriately be supported by fees. Activities with both, might require a mix of fees and taxes. So it seems to me that to Land Watch, that this issue of increased fees should be looked at broadly, not one small piece at a time, and that maybe it's time to consider some additional revenue for the LMD instead of it all being fee-supported, which is a very difficult position to put the department in. So thank you.
Thank you. J.H. McRaven, followed by Nina Lovinger.
Good morning. I'm Hope McRaven, here speaking on behalf of myself against the proposed raising of fees. Housing is needed in Lane County, and we have to encourage development, but we must do so responsibly. By raising the fees, you make it more difficult for single families and homeowners to have recourse against these large businesses coming in and buying up huge tracts of land, forest land, that we need for our children. So I urge you to consider keeping these fees reasonable, making it easier for the public to have recourse. Thank you.
Thank you. Nina Lovinger.
Good morning, Commissioners. I'm Nina Lovinger. I live along Little Fall Creek. Soon you'll consider a proposed increase of the elect not to hear appeal fee. The thrust for this proposal is based on the amount of time the LMD says it spends preparing documentations for the elect not to hear option. Instead of raising the fee, to save time and money, the county administrator, public works director, and LMD director have suggested an analysis of the process with the goal of making it more efficient and economical, and still affordable for the general public to participate in the appeal process. Neighbors often hope to have a neutral party review a hearing's official decision. An increase in the not-to-hear appeal fee would be a major obstacle to having the Land Use Board of Appeals hear an issue of importance to neighbors. Citizen participation is an important element in a healthy democratic society. Before considering a fee increase, please allow the administrator and directors the time to look into streamlining the procedure and come back with a report. A possibility is that on land use matters, you could receive a staff packet that is more like other consent calendar staff reports. Please support retaining the $250 elect not to hear fee. Thank you.
Thank you. And that was the last person I have signed up for public comment. Is there anyone else that wants to address the board that didn't get a chance to sign up? Okay, so moving on to Commissioner's response to public comment and/or other issues in remonstrance. Any remonstrance from the board or response to public comment?
What other issue?
Other issues, yeah. Commissioner Sorensen.
Thank you. I just want to thank everybody for coming into public comment today, and especially the commenters talking about the elect not to hear fee increase, the one that's proposed from $250 to $950. I think that some of the suggestions made in the public comment were really good ones in terms of how to provide appropriate opportunities for the public to appeal land use matters and also figure out how to pay for the cost of processing appeals. And I just want to thank the people that came in to talk about that, because it is a tension that's been present for quite a long time, namely the tension of having a high fee like $950 to an individual or a group of people that are wanting to review the propriety and legality of a particular land use matter, and being, with all the other costs associated with the appeals process. Filing fee is kind of the minor part of the whole thing, and yet that is a fee that has to be paid upfront right away. And so I appreciate some of the suggestions of how to reconcile reconcile that. Thank you.
Commissioner Farr.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just really quickly, I was really interested in the testimony from Mr. Wright, who seems to have left, but I'm familiar with his type of operation. It's they take locally manufactured wood products, 2x4s, 2x6s, et cetera, and they remanufacture them and ship them and sell them to wholesalers like Weatherly's, or they ship them to lumber yards in California, et cetera. It's a locally manufactured product that actually gets manufactured twice locally. Really one of the great types of businesses that we typically support. And I'm not speaking specifically for Mr. Wright, but that type of remanufacturing operation takes lumber, remanufactures it, and actually puts people to work twice manufacturing in Lane County. It's a pretty fantastic sort of an enterprise. So I was really interested to hear him discussing moving his company to a larger property and thereby export more manufactured and remanufactured wood products from Lane County abroad. So I'm looking forward to hearing more about that, Mr. Mokrzycki. The second thing I will mention, and this is really more of a personal nature, I'll tell you, the Three Lions are in my heart. Anybody know what the Three Lions are? That is England, and they play in the semifinals tomorrow, and that's why I'm wearing this tie, which is the St. George's England cross, supporting England playing Croatia tomorrow. So pardon my bald-faced support for my national team, but I'm doing it today. Thank you.
Yeah. So I'll just note that I'm on the other side of that.
Yes, he is.
Rooting for Croatia here.
That's why the space between us, right?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, you got to watch out for those soccer fans. I just want to say thank you to everybody for coming in to testify. We'll be taking up the issue of the appeals fees this afternoon, and it's scheduled for an hour discussion. So you can see we are taking this pretty seriously, and I do expect there to be quite a bit of discussion about that item. And I also want to thank the folks that came in and met with me last week to bring me their perspective on this. So also want to thank Mr. Wright for coming in, and I'm glad I was able to kind of stop him from handing out something that was part of a real estate transaction, one of the few things that can be protected under executive session law and public information. You know, they'd be kept confidential for at least a little while until we decide and complete some negotiations. So looking forward to staff briefing the board on that, probably in executive session soon. Would be great to convert that property that was a long time problem child in Dexter and brought a lot of strife to the neighbors to a productive piece of property that's employing people. So it's could be a very much a win-win situation for Lane County and more employment, more generated created wealth in the community, and also making use of an abandoned piece of property and getting it out of the county's hands and back on the tax rolls. So looking forward to those discussions. If there's no further.
Mr. Chair, I just on that topic, the property in Dexter, we have an item scheduled in a packet that will be coming to the July 24th board meeting on that issue. So Mr. Hurley just informed me of that. So
Great.
you should see that in a couple weeks here.
Yeah, because we're down next week, so that's probably as soon as we can get to it. I appreciate that, so we'll hopefully keep that moving ahead. It's really great that Commissioner Williams has been working with him to try and keep that company in Lane County and to make use of that property. So with that, we'll move on in the agenda. Is there any emergency business today? Any emergency business from the board? None. Then we'll move on to consent calendar, and item 5C1 has been pulled. And these are items that are considered routine by the Board of Commissioners and will be enacted in one motion in the form listed below. There will be no separate discussion for these items. If discussion was desired, the item will be removed from the calendar as it was under agenda adjustments to the agenda by Commissioner Sorensen, and we'll discuss it immediately afterward, after we finish with the consent calendar. Is there a motion to approve today's consent calendar? Commissioner Lykin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'd like to move approval of today's consent calendar with the exception of item 5C1, which will be voted separately.
I'll second.
So it's been moved by Commissioner Lykin, seconded by Commissioner Farr to approve the consent calendar less item 5C1. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion carries 4-0 with Commissioner Williams excused. So that will bring us to item 5C1. Commissioner Sorensen.
Well, I see our folks from HR here. Maybe they could make a brief comment on this. That'd be helpful.
Good morning, Commissioners. Chair Bozovich. So thank you for allowing us to include this on the agenda today. This is the authorization of the Administrative Services Agreement with Pacific Source and the Stop Loss Insurance for the renewal that was effective July 1, and it will be through June 30th of 2019. And my name is Mary Miller. I'm the Benefits and Wellness Manager.
I just wanted to say thanks so much for making those brief comments. I didn't really want to take up too much time, but just to say how important this item is, and the dollar amount is in the packet. It's in the $24 million range. So it's a large item, and I just wanted to compliment everyone involved with this, not just the county people, but also the Pacific Source people and the county employees that are beneficiaries of this. And just so that the public will understand the significance of this, represents a substantial reduction in the amount of money that taxpayers are having to pay for the health insurance and health care costs of Lane County employees. So why would taxpayers care whether or not Lane County employees are getting a good health program? Well, the answer is because this proposal that's now in its third year, third year. It's in its third year now, and it's becoming more routinized in the sense that it's on our consent calendar. We are spending considerably less than we would otherwise be spending on insurance if we had a direct insurance agreement with a company like Pacific Source. They're processing the claims, so the employees see present a card that says Pacific Source, but Pacific Source is more in the role of processing the claims. And we're paying for that service of processing the claims, but we're not actually insuring through a company like Pacific Source. We're self-insuring. And I think the administrator is now three or 4 years, I guess 4 years counting the 1 year implementation getting up to it. But we've been working on this for a number of years now, and I just want to say that even though this is a routine item and we're approving it as we did 3 previous times, that this is a really great thing for our employees, and it's a great thing for the taxpayer. Thank you. And with that, I'll make a motion to approve the order.
Second.
So it's been moved by Commissioner Sorensen, seconded by Commissioner Lykin to approve item 5C1, order 1807-1004. Commissioner Farr.
To the motion, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to thank Commissioner Sorensen for pulling this item and allowing us to highlight the great work that our HR department has been doing in reducing taxpayer costs on health insurance, and for his general praise of the work that you're doing, Ms. Miller, surrounding our health insurance. And Ms. Holmes, thank you very much for being here this morning. Really, a great job. We have very few opportunities to say out loud how we appreciate the work you're doing, but we all do truly appreciate the work you're doing. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you.
And I'd like to also thank Commissioner Sorensen for pulling this to give us a chance to highlight this, amazing thing that we're doing with the self-insurance that's been saving money. Not only that, our overall wellness program, the employee health clinic and the work we're doing there that has reduced our actual claims to where we had excess reserves in our health insurance fund that went towards that $8 million. We were able to pull some of that excess reserve out, and we're going to invest it against our PERS liability. So the savings, this, besides the self-insurance savings, also the savings generated in our wellness programs, in our our reduced claims, and the work that our employees have done on their own health. And that we've encouraged this culture of wellness versus a culture of, treating sickness, has really made a difference. And I really, it's an opportunity to talk about that a little bit, but just, it shows up not only in our reduced health insurance, but also shows up in the fact that we had excess reserves, and we're able to utilize those excess reserves and invest them in a great way. So really appreciate the work that you all are doing, and happy to have this pulled off so we can spend a minute just to say thanks and highlight that. Any other discussion to the motion? Seeing, hearing none, I'll call for the vote. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? The motion passes 4-0 with Commissioner Williams excused. Thank you very much for coming down.
Thank you.
So that brings us to item 6A in the agenda, Order 1807-1006, in the matter of approving an intergovernmental agreement with Homes for Good for the Housing First Building site and delegating authority to the county administrator to sign the approved agreement in the development of the Health and Human in the Department of Health and Human Services.
Mr. Chair, I'm just going to make a quick introductory comment here.
Great.
And just to say, this is, we talk about our strategic plan all the time, but it's a living, breathing thing that focuses our efforts. And in our new strategic plan, right at the top of Safe, Healthy County is affordable housing and homelessness. And you'll see in the board packet, it was highlighted that one of the specific initiatives calls for increasing housing options for residents to reduce the incidence of homelessness and increase affordability. So this project that our team here has been working on for quite some time, I could not be more pleased at how aggressively these folks have moved forward in pursuing this effort. They're on a mission, as we all are on a mission to get this done, and we, I think, have some really good news to share with you on progress on that front today. The item we're going to talk about will be new to you. We haven't discussed with the board this specific topic, but because of it, this project is moving so quickly, we want to bring it forward to you, and we think it's, we believe that you're going to be pleased with the direction that we're headed with that. So thank you. I just want to make those introductory comments.
Thank you, Chair Bozovich. Commissioners, I love it when the county administrator and I are on the same page. I also brought my laminated copy of the strategic plan for today. It really is an exciting opportunity. It's been about a year since we did our last major update to the board on this project. And today we have Steve Manila, our Human Services Division Manager, and Jacob Fox, the Director at Homes for Good, with us. And the two of them have done tremendous work on moving this project forward. So it's exciting to be able to share the progress that we've made to date with you, and then to come to you with some concrete asks. As the project has really taken shape, it's become more clear about the next steps in order to move this project on MLK Boulevard across the finish line for us. So we've come equipped to talk about those specific next steps with you as well, and answer any questions as we move forward on that project. And I think Steve's other introductory remarks serve, so I'm going to turn it over to Steve and Jacob.
Good morning, Chair Bozovich, Board of Commissioners. It's my pleasure to give you an update on the Housing First building that we discussed about a year ago. We were here before you, Jacob and I, talking about the Housing First building as a part of the Poverty and Homelessness Board's strategic plan, and now the county's strategic plan to enhance the availability of supportive housing for people with disabilities and other folks that are chronically homeless. So I want to put in context the item that you have before you today, why it's coming to you today, and the timeliness of this. We're in the process of generating resources for the Housing First building. And I think this past week, Jacob wrote you a note last Friday. State of Oregon, Oregon Housing Community Services allocated $3 million towards the project. So we're making great progress, and we have the potential now to look at a construction date of June 2019 or thereabouts, and have people housed by late in the summer of 2020. And so we're feeling very positive about this, and this is allowing us to move forward potentially faster than we had thought. So the key considerations here today is that we have a grant that has to go into the Oregon Health Authority by, I believe, the 18th of this month. And part of that grant requires site control in order for Homes for Good to apply to the Oregon Health Authority for mental health housing funds. In your packet, you have a copy of the intergovernmental agreement that was put together by legal counsel with the considerations that would go into place. The action that we're asking for today is to delegate authority to the county administrator to sign the intergovernmental agreement with Homes for Good based upon meeting the conditions in the intergovernmental agreement. I might add that, again, this is an ambitious project, and so meeting the conditions in the intergovernmental agreement isn't a cakewalk. It's a challenge for all of us involved in this project. So the key components of the consideration under the intergovernmental agreement are that in this partnership between Lane County and Homes for Good, the county housing authority, first of all, the Homes for Good would be required to come up with all of the financing for the construction of the project. Now, that's been a collaborative venture. And for example, Karen Gaffney has taken leadership here on the county side to get the healthcare community involved in. We've gotten some good donations from major healthcare providers for the project. But essentially, Homes for Good would be required to do that. The second piece is the operating budget. And currently, we have not raised or identified all of the funding for the operating budget for the project. We're close, but we don't have all of it. And the primary vehicle to pay for the operating costs for the project are project-based Section 8 certificates that Homes for Good would apply for, which would subsidize, with the exception of the rents, the minimal rents that the folks would pay would subsidize most of the operating costs, but we still have to acquire those operating costs. The third leg are the services, which the county and Health and Human Services would take responsibility for coming up with the funding for the services. The other items that are covered under this agreement are what we would call due diligence kinds of items that are required by law on the site, which include HUD requirements, because Section 8 would be used to subsidize rents at this property. There's a requirement for environmental review, and also a requirement because the property adjacent to our behavioral health building is in a flood zone. So that requires a federal review, which requires the participation of the City of Eugene in the process of getting that done in a timely manner. So those are all of the steps. The other piece that I would mention to you today that is somewhat unique about how we're bringing this forward is that we have attached to the agenda, we have the site map for the project. In order to come up with the specific piece of property that would be transferred to Homes for Good, we need to have surveying work done. We do know from the architects that we're talking about approximately 38,000 square feet of property that would be transferred. And basically what we're looking at is a a good neighbor policy. And this intergovernmental agreement would probably not be the last intergovernmental agreement or a memorandum of understanding between Lane County and Homes for Good. For those in the public, I just add a couple of things about the project. What we're looking at is 50 units of supportive housing. We're going to have behavioral health services that are available on site, peer support, activities for the tenants, the ability for folks to be involved in employment and training, the ability for folks to take advantage of intensive case management integrated services that are available at our behavioral health campus adjacent to the property. So with that, we're available here to answer any questions that you have about this item. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, if I can add one final piece as we circle back around to the plan and really the vision for this project. You recall from the budget committee process where we talked about housing and really the return that we get on these investments. And this particular project that we refer to as Housing First, the public may not understand that that particular strategy around low barrier housing is our very best opportunity to address the needs of people who are chronically homeless in this community. It really brings people in from the street without creating barriers to housing, and then enables us to engage them in services. And this is the model. Steve mentioned that our healthcare partners are collaborating with us as investors, and it's because it is a project that has been shown to reduce pressure on the public safety system. It reduces pressure on emergency departments and healthcare payers. So it really is a win-win for the community to be able to establish a project like this. And I think part of why the state has acknowledged the county's effort and set aside that $3 million of funding for us is because of the collaboration that we've established between the county and Homes for Good, and also because of the adjacency we have. It's a creative opportunity to build housing right next door to our primary care and specialty mental health services. So it's a tremendous opportunity for us to move this item forward, and it's exciting to be at this point so close to having all the pieces put together.
Commissioner Farr.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If I go past noon talking, cut me off about 5 minutes early, would you?
We'll leave at 5.
Yeah, I clearly have a great many things to say about this, but really I'm going to be as concise as I possibly can. You know, if I look at our strategic plan from the Poverty and Homelessness Board, which I keep with me along with my my Lane County strategic plan, the top item on Poverty and Homelessness Board is, and I'll read it directly, is increase availability and access to coordinated supportive housing, shelter, and services. And I'll read the top two items on our Lane County strategic plan: affordable housing and homelessness, behavioral and community health. Well, that all wraps together. Those top priority items for both Lane County and the Poverty and Homelessness Board wrapped together in this facility. And this facility is a cornerstone of a larger initiative that we're undertaking. And that is we have a goal of providing a total of 600 supportive housing units between now and the end of 2021. That is a highly aspirational goal. This is a cornerstone of that goal. This is a facility that really there are few, if any, that are exactly like this any place around. Mr. Manella and Mr. Fox, you and I have both toured Portland's facility, the Bud Clark Center, which does supportive housing in a slightly different fashion, and it does things admittedly very well, and some things that could be done better. I think we have an opportunity with this facility in Lane County to really be a beacon, not just for the rest of the work on Operation 600, which is what we call our goal of adding 600 supportive housing units between now and 2021. It's not only the cornerstone of that, but it can be a beacon for other jurisdictions throughout the nation. And this weekend, I'm going to have a chance to talk about it extensively at NACO's annual conference, and I'm on the Health Steering Committee, and we'll be talking very specifically about our frequent user system engagement and about making certain that we are, as you said, Ms. Gaffney, placing our highest priority in putting people in housing who otherwise are being a strain on the system across the board. Now, Straining the system is not the worst thing that happens. The strain on personal lives and on human potential is the worst thing that's happening when we don't house people who have behavioral or substance issues that can be addressed through permanent and supportive housing. That is what we're talking about here. It's innovative, it's fantastic, and there's a word that I've always liked, and I don't use it very often. It's delightful. And it really is. I mean, it fills me personally with delight in that we are able to address what are our really basic, most urgent needs in our community surrounding both housing and behavioral health issues. I'm really, truly pleased with this. I have reams of things to say, but I know Commissioner Sorensen and others want to talk about this. I'm very pleased that this is happening. It's not an easy transaction, and it's not an easy project. Mr. Fox, you've been laboring day and night on this. I know you have, as has Mr. Manella and Ms. Gaffney. How many times have you and I talked about this project from starting, I think, probably a little over 2 years ago when it was a seed, germinating, and now we're seeing it begin to grow and begin to get legs. And it really is, Mr. Mokryski, this is delightful. Thank you for bringing this forward today. Thank you.
Commissioner Sorensen.
Thank you very much. Well, so the basic plan here is to transfer county land near the mental health building on MLK to Homes for Good. Homes for Good then applies for a grant with the state, $650,000, and then they will we will build a Housing First facility. So quick question, what is the anticipated number of people that would be served?
The building design, Commissioner Sorensen, is 50 people housed at any given time.
Okay, so it won't be 50 people for, the same 50 people for 25 years, it'll be a rotating group of people. Okay. You know, this is a great proposal. I really appreciate it, and I'm all in favor of it. I do have a couple of questions, though, and actually these are more procedural questions. The first is, this is a county-owned asset, and we recently had a big discussion here, up here, about a capital plan for Lane County, where we would look at all of Lane County's capital assets. I guess assets that have a useful life beyond 1 year is the typical definition, and this land would fit into that category. So this is primarily for Ms. Gaffney and Mr. Mokryski. In a perfect world, had we had that plan in place 3 years ago or 2 years ago, would this be on that capital plan?
Yes.
Okay, so we would know at least during year 1 or year 2 or year 3 that in year 5 we were going to make this transition.
Yes.
Okay.
So in an example, just, you know, we have the 5 years of projects that we know we need to pursue, and then we also have, I forget what we're calling it, but there's another section of the new CIP that identifies additional projects that are not totally fully formed and are still in, so the courthouse is one of those that's on that list in the CIP. You know, we don't have a design, we haven't identified all the funding for it, we're still working on the property and all that, but so it probably, in an ideal world, had we've had a CIP a few years ago, this project would have at least been on that sort of future ideas list.
And I gather when we get our first list, this project, the one we're talking about today, will be on that list.
Yes.
Because we'll be in the process of making that transfer.
Yes.
Okay.
Once we've clearly identified all of the financing, you've heard that many of the pieces are in place, but once all that is solidified, we have a design, we have a construction timeline for all that. We'll build it into the CIP in, you know, years 1, 2, 3, or whatever it needs to be.
And I would just add to that, the actual development is happening at Homes for Good.
Right.
So after we transfer the land, it's a Homes for Good project.
Which is a great segue to Jacob, and that is, does Home for Good have the same kind of 5-year capital project list and annual revision that Mr. Mokryski just described?
That's a good question, Commissioner Sorensen. I would say we don't have a CIP as the county would define it. But as you'll recall, when you put your Homes for Good board hat on, we've done an extensive update to the Homes for Good commissioners about kind of all of our real estate holdings, and we've been sort of doing that regularly since I started in 2013.
Okay.
And certainly if the board, the Homes for Good board wants it in a different format, we would be happy to discuss that with you.
Okay, thank you, and thanks for that clarification. Yeah, and thanks for recognizing that the 5 elected commissioners do join 2 appointed commissioners to form the Homes for Good board. It's a interesting relationship. And then finally, I wanted to ask all of you about the topic of project labor agreements and whether or not project labor agreements, at what point a project or labor agreement would be considered for a specific county project, which I guess actually this isn't going to be a county project. So I guess this will be hypothetical to the county because this isn't Homes for, this project is not a county project once it's sort of handed over to, that's my terminology, to Homes for Good. But I would like to get your perspective on them because as I understand and have worked with project labor agreements in the state and federal context, it's an opportunity to get a quality job done in the construction of the project, and that the concept, also known as a community workforce agreement, it helps and establishes the terms and conditions on a specific construction project. So are you familiar with this? Do you use them? Have you not used them? What's kind of your attitude about the, and would one be used in this project?
So I can speak to that from a Homes for Good perspective. So I am familiar with project labor agreements. Homes for Good has not historically or currently used those agreements. What I could say is that we are certainly committed to local unions. Our workforce at Homes for Good are represented by AFSCME, and there are a large number of union workers that work on every one of our projects. But beyond that, I don't have any specific statistics for you. And the direct answer to your question is we do not use project labor agreements, and we're not contemplating using them on this project.
Okay, and I guess since the land hasn't been transferred to Homes for Good, that really is a down the road issue in this project. Is that fair to say?
That is fair to say.
Okay. And what about project labor agreements in Lane County government? Is that used, not used, discussed? Don't use them, haven't discussed it, have extensively discussed it and rejected it? What's the status of project labor agreements?
I certainly can only speak for Health and Human Services. I don't know about the rest of the county, but we have not used those, and I don't recall them being talked about on prior projects.
Okay.
I'm not aware that we've used them.
Okay,
or
so
considering.
not considered and not used.
Yeah.
Okay.
We certainly can look into that and provide an update for the
Okay.
board on.
Well, maybe just as a suggestion, and not that you have to do this, but just an idea, is in the first review of the capital improvement program that's coming up, will that be in January or February?
Yes, early. We're
Yeah.
shooting for early in the calendar.
Yeah. You could make mention of it, and to the extent that you have time to see when the U of O or LTD or other local public entities that have used them, the benefits and/or drawbacks of them. Okay. Thank you very much, and I think this is really great. I mean, we've been talking about Housing First up here for a long time, and to see this come to fruition and see the cooperation between Homes for Good and the county, phenomenal. And also that the state is stepping up to actually jumpstart this. Instead of this being a theoretical idea, it's a real idea, and it's really going to happen. I really appreciate it. And the proximity to our services and transportation for the residents, really great.
Commissioner Lycan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'm just going to echo a lot of the comments that have been made. I appreciate the work being done here and want to say thank you very much. And Jacob, I in particular want to say thank you for your sense of urgency. Frankly, I see more of a sense of urgency coming from Homes for Good and some of our nonprofit groups that are trying to build what I would call housing for sometimes the less fortunate, affordable housing, whatever you want to call it. And I want to say thank you very much for that. I think that that's really, really key here in trying to move this forward. And it shows really, I think, where the whole attitude is. And so I want to express my big thanks to you, but also thanks to our staff for really working closely on this, and Steve in particular, you. And I want to point that out because there seems to be that sense of urgency here on this particular type of housing. And I say that for this type of reason. Frankly, I don't see that sense of urgency coming from professional planners at local city jurisdictions. I don't see that. And Commissioner Farr has brought this up I don't know how many times. The fact that Envision Eugene took 10 years is, to me, one of the most ridiculous things I think I've ever seen. That's a lack of urgency. We have one of the tightest housing markets, not only on the West Coast, but in the country. But yet, here we are trying to figure out what are we going to do next. And then with the latest building codes fiasco that occurred from the state, I was visiting with some pretty influential builders here locally who are beginning to look outside for the first time. They saw that as uncertainty and have realized that maybe moving and taking a look at a different state is worth our while. And it's not just Boise. Twin Falls is exploding too. Twin Falls, Idaho is really a lot going on there. A lot happening in Washington. And they're beginning to look elsewhere. And that's why I say to our staff, to Jacob, this sense of urgency, frankly, can be set as an example. And frankly, what I have seen from some of our planners and those involved here locally, they don't seem to have a self-awareness that there's this issue going on. And why is that? I'm trying to figure that out. That's just my soapbox right now. But as far as this is concerned and the project that you're working on now, the fact that you came to us a year ago, and here we are a year later. Frankly, that's pretty good timing. It's a lot better than 10 years. And so I want to say thank you for that, and thank you for the work. This is dedication, and this is called being serious, and you deserve a lot of credit for that. And by the way, I just want to comment to you, Jacob, real quickly. I went to an event in Springfield on the 29th called Solutions in Housing, and Steve Oakes was there and part of the panel. And you could tell what a difference, because Steve was laser focused on what he's supposed to be doing. Man, you could get that from him. And think about, I know what my job is. I work for Homes for Good, and this is what I'm trying to do here. Land bank, create opportunities so we can have more of these housing projects to create more affordable housing for folks that really, on an affordability standpoint. And man, some of the other comments, they were just kind of going all over the place. And that's when you step back and go, talk about people who don't have self-awareness. It is just stunning to me. So congratulations on that. And if you could pass my compliments on to Steve from that, I really appreciate it, because frankly, I enjoyed hearing from him and his laser focus on this is what I do, this is what we're out to accomplish. It was refreshing. Anyway, that's what I have to say on this. This is a great project, and I appreciate the teamwork that's happening here to get us to move forward. Thank you.
Thank you. So I just want to say, I really appreciate the work that's been done to keep moving this project forward. Been talking for years about the need for supported housing, housing first, everything it gets called. We had many discussions over the years about homelessness and people pushing for things like rest stops and camping ordinances and allowing camping. And all along, I've been talking about that doesn't really resolve the issue. What resolves the issue is this model of where we connect people with intensive case management, and we deal with some of the reasons why they're homeless, and help get them healthy and back in, either into the proper housing that supports them, whether it's a group home or, get them stabilized and they end up, being able to get into regular housing. And this low barrier housing is really important. And it reminds me, that years ago, I had an opportunity to tour Station 7 during the United Way campaign, at UWEB's annual United Way campaign for employees. I got a chance to go tour Station 7 that Looking Glass has for homeless youth. And it's not just about giving them a place to stay overnight that's safe. It's also about their staff provided case management for each one of those kids and work towards getting the youth back in their home, or if the home was inappropriate, getting them into a foster situation. But it was about first getting them off the street and getting them safe, that low barrier, and then connecting them with that case management and working to resolve whatever issue had them homeless and away from their home, and on their own on the streets. And that was just, like my first exposure to that. And it was like, wow, this is a real, opportunity. And I've talked about 15th Night for years because I feel like that's the lead in to long-term homelessness, and that issue with youth homelessness. But this housing first model that we're moving forward with is really about taking that into the adults. Our Fuse pilot showed how powerful that is. And it's been shown across the country. I've gone to speak to groups that are a little bit skeptical about the idea, whether it's the Rubicon Society or whoever, is a little bit skeptical about the whole idea of housing first, and brought them the statistics from Denver, from Salt Lake, from other areas of the country, and the studies of how supported housing saves so much money on law enforcement, emergency services, emergency response of all kinds, that it's really a very powerful tool. And I'm really pleased that we're looking at this 50 units and getting them online by 2020. At the same time, Commissioner Farr and I had the opportunity to be out at Veterans Legacy. Was that last week or the week before?
Last week, yeah.
Last week. And,
No, it was the week before.
Week before. Yeah, I know, it's the 4th of July. So, and the project they're moving forward with out at the old Alma Forest Work Camp, that's basically a housing first model. Very low barrier entry for veterans, and then bringing them through an intensive, case management situation to get them, healed and better and back into society. Really, so I look at that as another, as we look at how many units of supported housing we're trying to get into Lane County. Here's 50 here. They're looking at 50 out there at the camp. So there's 100 towards that goal of 600 that, was a pretty far-reaching goal at that point. But it's really that model. And, we've watched the mission, Eugene Mission, change their model to basically a supported housing model, where it's not just about getting, a hot dinner and a hot breakfast and going to services, and that's all you really had to do to get a night's stay at the mission, to where you really have to be working on yourself and your life. And I think that's really changed their success rate and some of the stories you're seeing coming out of the mission. So really pleased to see us moving forward with this. Really pleased to see the work between Homes for Good and county staff, and really support this intergovernmental agreement and moving forward. And I'm sorry, David, it's just not time for public comment. It's not time for public comment, so we're past that. So. A detail for down the road.
Chair Bozovich, just real briefly, I wanted to make a quick introduction. So Nora Cronin is over there. We hired Nora a couple months ago because we knew we needed to add some capacity to our real estate development team. And Commissioner Lycan, to your comment, in pointing out Steve Oakes, I just needed to acknowledge Steve and Nora because, you know, I can't do my job without their support, and they're both exceptional employees and supporters of this work. Just since Nora arrived 2 months ago, she's applied for a $750,000 Federal Home Loan Bank grant and is finishing up a $550,000 OHA grant. And she was instrumental in supporting me as we were answering questions from OHCS as they were contemplating the $3 million commitment that they made last Friday. So just want to make sure that she's acknowledged for her great work.
I noticed her smiling in the back as everyone was talking positively about Housing First and this whole model, so. Commissioner Farr.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Mr. Fox, thank you for introducing Nora Cronin. I was going to do that, but I should have known you were going to, because she is such an instrumental part of the project that we're talking about right now. Thank you for being here, Nora. Thank you for the presentations you make during the Homes for Good meetings and the work that we're going to do together to bring this to fruition. And the other thing, very briefly, Commissioner Bozovich mentioned Veterans Legacy, the supportive housing that is going to be taking place out there. I think later in today's meeting, Mr. Mokrais, you may hear a little bit more about Veterans Legacy during items from commissioners at the end of the meeting. But that being said, I'm going to say one more thing about Operation 600. It is a team effort, and it really is, once again, aspirational to add 600 supportive housing unit beds in Lane County between now and the end of 2021. The Veterans Legacy does count toward that, would potentially count toward that at least. Work that's being done by sponsors potentially could count toward that. Other work that makes it seem a little bit less of a far-reaching goal, but it does ultimately provide housing for people who are the most desperately in need of housing to access the services that they need, that residential facilities can allow them to access the services. People who are living on the street simply do not have the availability or the access to the types of services that are required to bring people through substance issues or help them with their ongoing chronic behavioral health issues. So I'm really, once again, delighted. I'm stunned that we've gotten this far. At first, I thought we might move a little bit faster, but I tried pushing the ball downhill and found that there were a few obstacles in the way, financing being a large part of it. And Mr. Fox, I just wanted to mention that last Friday you attended the OHA meeting in Salem, excuse me. I intended to be at that, and it was good to see the ultimate outcome. We've all worked with Commissioner Claire Hall, who is a new member on that board. One of the first actions that Claire took was helping us through getting the $3 million. So thank you to Commissioner Hall from Lincoln County, and thank you for the work that we've done getting it this far. Once again, this is a cornerstone of a pretty big inspirational and aspirational effort that we're undertaking in Lane County. So once again, I could talk a long time about this. In fact, I have talked a long time about this, but it is a wonderful first step. Thank you.
So with that, is there somebody that would like to make a motion?
Yes, let me find
Commissioner Farr. Yeah, I know. That's why I was looking in his direction purposefully.
I move, Mr. Chair, I move passage of Order 18071006 in the matter of approving an intergovernmental agreement with Homes for Good for the Housing First building site and delegating authority to the county administrator to sign the approved agreement in the Development of Health and Human Services, in the Department, excuse me, of Health and Human Services.
I did the same thing.
Second.
Been moved by Commissioner Farr, seconded by Commissioner Lycan to pass Order 18071006. Discussion to motion. Commissioner Sorensen.
Thank you very much. One thing I was going to say is that Housing First as a concept emerged in the late 80s with Los Angeles, and the idea being, having in-depth screening, assessment, having housing proximate to services, having housing that would be available to people regardless of their drug addiction problems or other problems, and sort of taking people as they are. And And to see this cooperation that we're going to be getting Housing First project in our own community, it's just really great to see, and I appreciate everything that's leading up to that.
Commissioner Lyken.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks for bringing that up, Commissioner Sorensen, and about LA, but I think recently Utah, the state of Utah has really been pushing this very aggressively, and I think they've become kind of a model. And I think we stated this before, Lane County, frankly, has been the model of Housing First statewide, and it's so refreshing to see the state of Oregon now realizing how important this is and following Lane County's lead. And frankly, that's, to me, you can't get a better compliment than that. And one last thing I'll say is that here where we were a year ago from a concept to where we are today to actually see some dollars put toward this, it's not that slow, Pat, I promise. So it's actually pretty darn good. And this is pretty impressive. So anyway, thanks again for your quality work on this.
Any further discussion to the motion? Seeing and hearing none, I'll call for the vote. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously 4-0 with Commissioner Williams excused.
Bravo, thank you.
So that brings us to item 7A, which is county administration announcements. Mr. Mokrzycki.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a couple of brief items. First, on the next item that we're going to be talking about with Mr. Kyler, the legislative principles, priorities and principles. There are two items in there. I just want to call attention here, and then Mr. Kyler is going to talk in more detail. Two letters of support. One is for Cottage Grove for what was formerly known as the Tiger Grant, the Build Grant. And the second, Alex, tell me again this. For the Portacoos Bay. So they're asking for support letters. Portacoos Bay and Cottage Grove are asking for support letters for transportation projects under the Build Grant. So we'll talk in more detail, but I just wanted to highlight that, and particularly for our minutes later. Wanted to mention that we have, this week I have, as we're going through, we have 24 meetings. I've shared with the board 24 meetings with staff across the organization to roll out our strategic plan. This week we have technology services staff, and next week we have parole and probation. So those meetings continue, and it's really been a great opportunity to connect with all of our employees and talk about where we're at as an organization, where we're headed, some of the new components of our plan, and our focus and vision moving forward. So it's been very well received. And maybe Mr. Kyler, I think why don't we just transition into the next item? I would like to just have a brief conversation and sort of recap a little bit on the meeting that occurred with counties and the governor's office related to the Comcast settlement and the PERS side account, and a few other things. So we can work that in here somehow?
Okay.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Commissioners. Alex Kyler, your Intergovernmental Relations Manager. We've got a report back on the Legislative Committee meeting. Your packet does include a memo, and there should be two letters of support now posted. We had one from that came in a timely manner from the Portacoos Bay for their application, and then we've had another letter that was just added to support the City of Cottage Grove's proposal. I've got hard copies if you'd prefer to see the City of Cottage Grove's proposal. Just let me know.
They've also both been posted, correct?
They've both been
So
posted.
Ms. Jones has posted both those to the website, so they're available.
Yeah. So first off, Mr. Chair, I'm just going to start with the Legislative Committee report back. The Legislative Committee did hold a regular meeting. We're doing quarterly meetings now. The meeting was on May 24th, and we talked. It was an interesting meeting because I had just come back from Salem for the legislative days, that 3-day interim hearings, which included, if you recall, the special session. They came back for a 1-day. It was actually just a couple-hour session on a tax issue. But We went over a couple things that had come up during the legislative days, talked a little bit about the governor's budget process and how that's beginning and ongoing. We did add 2 legislative priorities and principles to the legislative document that I want to speak to a little bit more in detail. One is on law library issues, and the other is on the opioid epidemic and our response to that. We had some updates on priorities that you'd already passed from previous updates from the legislative committee. So we talked a little bit about what I'm calling farm to table. That's the issue that arose. We've known about it for a while, but it arose out of the situation up in Coburg with agrarian ales. We talked a little bit about Housing First, actually. We have at least tentatively scheduled a legislative hearing, an informational hearing during the next legislative days. So those are in September of this year, to talk a little bit about the Fuse project, and much as Commissioner Farr is doing to NACO, we'll be doing to the legislature in September, providing to the legislature in September. We talked a little bit about a courthouse and a concept that you'd previously approved, which is what I'm currently calling the county charter amendment. We talked about 2 new state legislative concepts. One has to do with protected addresses for driver's license for certain public safety professionals. Those are folks who work in our youth services division, have asked for some anonymity with respect to public records that they personally hold. And then we talked a little bit about again, some opioid issues, particularly around the use of naloxone, which is an anti-opioid drug. So your board packet does include a brief discussion of that, but I think the important thing is to look at attachment A, which is this document now that is being updated regularly. And you can see where we've added a couple of new priorities. So on page 3 of that document, we didn't have anything discussing the law library, and so we've added a bullet there: support legislation, appropriations, and policy direction that stabilizes county operation of law library. We do have a new law librarian, as you're aware. You guys did do some work this morning to update the Lane manual with respect to the advisory committee there. And it's really been great because she's bringing these kinds of things to my attention to say, you need a legislative concept here, or a legislative priority here. The other one that we talked about at legislative committee is on page 4, and that is highlighted there: support efforts to combat opioid overdoses by increasing the availability and access to naloxone. Naloxone is a drug that people can administer when somebody's having an overdose episode, and it helps in many cases to revive them. The legislature has done a number of efforts over the last couple of years about naloxone-related issues. We've still are working our way in Lane County through a couple things that you've heard Health and Human Services staff present to you about, particularly the availability and access for naloxone at pharmacies. And so that's been a little bit hit and miss in staff's experience, and so we're trying to create some legislation that may be more of a mandate for pharmacies to provide better access for naloxone. We're working through, the governor has an opioid epidemic task force where most of the opioid issues are being placed, and the governor's staff has a placeholder bill, and so really just trying to utilize that structure to get these kinds of things advanced. And then finally on page 5, I've been placing the actual individual bill documentation right there, and so you can see we've got the second set of amendments there, amend ORS Chapter 689 and others, that's the naloxone-related concepts. But the other one that was brought forward through some of Administrator Mokrajski's work with county staff came to him, and then he sent it over to me, and we put it onto the agenda. But essentially, the request was that county juvenile justice employees be provided a similar set of opportunities to have anonymity with respect to some personal information. So there are certain public safety officers in particular who can put, for example, for voters registration and even DMV licensing, they can put their workplace as their address rather than have to put their home address. And so it gives them a little bit more personal protection. And so we looked into the statutes and we realized that state OIA employees have that ability to have that anonymity, but county youth employees do not. So we think we've got a pretty clear path forward to gain that. Should be a fairly minor bill to be able to run through this system up in Salem, knock on wood. And at any rate, the committee talked about it, and we vetted it pretty well, I think, with staff and county council to make sure that there's no unintended consequences of taking that step. So that really outlines the legislative committee report back. You do have a order in front of you that will memorialize these changes. And so I think you've got the number, Mr. Chair. And if I might, I'll just pause there if there's questions about the legislative committee meeting.
You mentioned the county charter issue. I wanted to have you explain what you meant by that.
Sure. Chair Bozovich and Commissioner Sorensen, this came about as a result of Council Dingell's experience with the aerial spray issue. If you recall, there were a couple of different lawsuits where the proponents were of the charter amendment were obviously they're trying to get something placed on the ballot, and there was a question about when the clerk reviews different criteria to approve a potential ballot measure. You probably recall there is the single subject review that actually gets done prior to somebody going out and gathering signatures for an initiative process. The separate vote requirement, though, if you recall, Judge Rasmussen found that he would only review that when it was presented to the voters, and thus his initial review of that suggested that you have to qualify for the ballot in order to present something to the voters. Thus, you must go out and gather your signatures based on a ballot measure that has not been reviewed for the separate vote requirement.
So this isn't really changing Lane County's charter, it's changing a state law.
Exactly.
That is related to this.
All we're trying to do is move the timing of that review to be at the same time as the single subject review. So it would avoid people who are attempting to put something under our ballot, or excuse me, any home rule county's ballot to change the charter such that they could have both the separate vote requirement and the single subject requirement reviewed prior to gathering signatures. Seems like a fairly logical. Yeah. We've asked AOC to take this up as a priority, and we've been working that issue through the governance committee at AOC.
And it's actually been adopted by AOC as one of their legislative efforts. Yeah, it got picked up by the governance committee and then passed. That was passed by the legislative committee. So it's on their list there are only 9 charter counties it would impact, but any county that wants to become a charter county in the future, this also impacts. And as we look at the recent turn-in of signatures for the star voting, they're going to have to go through the same separate vote review if they turned in enough signatures and qualify. That's going to have to go through the separate vote after they put in all that effort for collecting signatures. So it's a matter of just clarifying that state law. The state law didn't have timing written into it. The only reference to timing, it said prior to presentation to the voters, which is very loose, and we're asking for a very small amendment to that portion of ORS to clarify it's prior to gathering signatures. Commissioner Lycan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the opioid piece, maybe a couple questions here on this. Frankly, with our other hat on, the Board of Health, it's obviously been a very important subject for us for a while. Our staff has done yeoman's work on this, and we've been proudly explaining and talking to the public about the 40% reduction that's occurred within Lane County operations. Question I have for you, Alex, is that here recently, I know in the House, Congressman Walden frankly did a yeoman's job in moving opioid legislation through. What I don't remember is that if that has passed the Senate and if it's been signed by the President. And I don't recall, and I don't know if anybody else does, but I know it passed the House. And so my question would be, and I guess it's probably too early for this at this point in time, but my question would be, once it's passed and signed, I'd like to maybe see an analysis of what that means for local public health authorities and what kind of support they would be coming to the local public health authorities on behalf of congressional action. And so that would be my question on this. And frankly, I don't recall if it's passed the Senate yet. I don't know if anybody else does or not, but Commissioner Sorensen, I don't know, are you aware? Yeah, I'm not either. So, but that would be my question right now. And so it's obviously something maybe that you can't do, at this point, but I think it's something that would be further down the road, something that I think would be really important for Lane County, especially as the public health authority. And that's really my question on that. But I'm also happy to see, again, the state taking much more of an active role on this issue where, again, I think what you've seen as the counties, as public health authorities, have established that active role. And so it's good to see the state putting forth more of an active role as well on this. So thank you for the update on that. But that would be my question, is that what the federal legislation may end up doing as far as being a positive for counties in general. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. So any other questions on the legislative update? If not, I would entertain a motion to adopt the board order which adopts the legislative update changes in attachment A. Commissioner Lycan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'd like to move approval of Order 1807-1007, the matter of updating priorities and principles for the Oregon Legislature.
Second.
Been moved by Commissioner Lycan, seconded by Commissioner Farr to approve Order 1807-1007. Discussion to the motion. Seeing and hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes 4-0 with Commissioner Williams excused, which moves us on to the support letters.
Correct. Chair Bozovich, you recall, and Commissioners, you'll recall, when I did a report to the board on the omnibus budget for federal fiscal year 18, there was a significant increase in the amount of funding for the Tiger Grant Congress appropriated $1.2 billion when previous years had seen pretty typical $500 million pots of money for the Tiger program. President Trump renamed Tiger to be Build, and but not much else has changed in the program. Applications are due very soon. I think they're due like the 17th of this month, and we've received 2 requests for letters of support, one from the City of Cottage Grove and one from the International Port of Coos Bay. As you'll recall, we have actually, Lane County has been applying to Tiger. We've done 2 previous applications for Territorial Highway, and we did very much contemplate getting into this round, given the improved pot of money. And I just want to take a moment to explain that ultimately what didn't change in the build, from the Tiger to the Build program, and in spite of all the additional money, was that projects still need to be obligated at the same date as the previous round, and that is by 2020. We had a telephone conversation with the folks who reviewed our Tiger application for Territorial, and they did not advance our application because they felt like we were not going to be able to obligate the funding by 2020. And so that date has not changed in this new round, and unfortunately we have not done enough work to really feel like we are ready enough for an application to be generated from Lane County. We spent quite a bit of time after the last Tiger application actually working on the jurisdictional transfer, and I think most of that work has actually gotten ironed out now, but it meant that there just wasn't enough time to focus on the actual project development for the improvements. So the jurisdictional transfer is actually a pretty significant step forward. The other thing that occurred, I think the board is aware that we've had a fairly significant staff turnover out at Public Works in transportation planning, with Dave Reeser going over to the U of O, and so he was a point person on the Tiger application, and that may have had something to do with our inability to apply on this round. But these 2 programs, I think, are worthy of the board's support. We've supported many applications for improvements for the Coos Bay Rail Link. This one is focusing on bridge improvements. They continue to strive to improve bridges, trestles, and trackage to be able to get speeds up and to allow for heavier trains to travel on that corridor. And I think that's something that the board has continually supported. This is a new program, a new proposal out of Cottage Grove. They're calling it their Cottage Grove Main Street Revitalization Project. I frankly don't know a whole lot about the proposal, but they've sent me a couple pages on it this morning. They want to reconstruct 5 blocks of Main Street, reconstruct side streets within the historic district. They're asking to construct curbless festival streets, and work on some ADA issues within the Main Street refinement plan area. So I think they don't actually even know what their final dollar amount is going to be, but they think it's in the neighborhood of $10 million request. And I think it's just indicative of the amount of new money that's available for build. What we also realized when we did the debrief with USDOT staff, just the amount of people who apply to Tiger versus how much they're able to fund is pretty remarkable. And I'm certain this round will be the same thing, with literally probably 1,000 applications coming into USDOT, and their ability to fund will be way less than all the applications gathered. So at any rate, that's what I know about these two letters of support they're asking you to approve.
Thanks, Alex. One quick question. What's the deadline for this round of build?
I want to say it's the 17th of July. It's coming right up. I know they were,
Okay.
this was sort of the
We're not
last
going to see any more of these come in from other jurisdictions at this point?
No, we will not.
Okay, I was in the back of my head thinking of Florence and their Highway 101 revision Florence project, and the fact that their bids came in, I think, a little bit more than they expected. Maybe I was thinking they might use that to build, the Cottage Grove project sounds almost duplicative of what the city of Florence is trying to achieve in a lot of ways.
And Chair Bozovich, they may be applying and just haven't asked us for a letter of support. I don't know. I did see quite a bit of traffic from the congressional offices asking, to remind people that they had a bit longer timeline for generating letters, and I didn't see anything come back in terms of replying all from those emails.
Okay, great. Any questions on the support letters?
Take them one at a time.
We can take them one at a time or together. I would like to see a motion just authorizing the chair to sign on behalf of the board. Just a simple motion.
Yeah.
So that we have that documented, that we are supplying our support as the entire board, not just the chair.
Okay, then I'll make a motion, so moved, and so can we include both letters then on one motion?
Yep.
Okay, so moved.
I will second that.
So it's been moved by Commissioner Likens, seconded by Commissioner Farr, to authorize the chair to sign letters of support for the Coos Bay Rail Line and City of Cottage Grove for build grants. Commissioner Sorensen.
On the Coos Bay Rail Line, is there, my understanding is that they receive federal support, they've received state support. What is different about this letter or this proposal, or what's this round of support?
Chair Bozovich, Commissioner Sorensen, my understanding is with this round of funding, they would work on their bridges, including, I think one of the reasons why we've stayed engaged with them, particularly on the Highway 126 West corridor. And at least what I understood was that as they're improving and looking to how to spend money under this particular proposal, and I don't know the name of the creek, but there's a metal bridge about halfway along the corridor on the south side that some of the funding for this would go to improve that. And so that line, if you recall, was constructed actually, I think, around in the 1890s. So some of those.
If I would recall, I mean, am I that old? I don't really recall that. Maybe, in the early 1900s, but not the late 1800s.
At any rate, that bridge is in need of some sort of upgrades, and so that was included in their proposal on how to use the funds. But I don't exactly know all the issues. I think you're also may be
I've heard through history reading
some of the problems they've had with the bridge at Cushman.
Yep.
And I think they've handled most of their issues down in Coos County with the swing bridge. But
one thing that you might consider is talking with our Public Works people and about the idea of having a presentation, not today, obviously, but down the road or down the track, on the topic of the whole 126 corridor and the relationship between the rail traffic and our efforts to get more freight onto the rail, whether it's the former bridge builders in the Reedsport area, or whether it's our own lumber production that uses the route. and basically an informative kind of, not really policy level, but more informative of what ODOT and the rail line owners themselves are doing and what their challenges are. Because this does come up in the context of safety on 126. It comes up on the need for tourism and getting big trucks off of the road as much as possible and getting more freight onto the rail line. And I think that it really is like, has a whole bunch of connectors to our tourism, work, safety, traffic safety, economic development. Just an idea, because it's been a number of years, and I do remember it's been a number of years that the Coos Bay Rail has not been here for a long time to just give us their current pitch. Because that is helpful, the information you provided about which bridges are the bottlenecks on it and what they're, because I think that the one time we had a public rail testimony in Eugene several years ago at the federal courthouse over the vacation of rail lines in Oregon. The businesses that depend on that, they're pretty significant businesses. And they're important not only to Lane County, but to Coos County, Douglas County. So, thank you so much.
So I'll just note quickly that I believe one of the bridges that they're looking at is what's known as the Vaughan Viaduct, which is a wood trestle bridge that is deteriorating and needs significant repairs. I ride my bicycle under that on a regular basis. It's on one of my regular routes, and I can tell you it's in need of repair from looking underneath. I often go underneath that with trepidation. And I know it's also one of the places where they are speed limited due to the trestle. And that's one of the issues about the Coos Bay Rail Line and its viability is it's speed limited in so many sections that it takes more than an 8-hour shift to get from the port to the Eugene rail yards, which gets to be a difficulty in moving freight. So the more areas they can improve and remove speed limit restrictions, the better, the closer they'll get to that 8-hour move and make it much more viable and the ability to pull freight off of 126. So I fully support that idea, and I support the idea of bringing those folks in. We were fortunate to have a Highway 126 stakeholders meeting recently that the county put together, where the Coos Bay Rail folks were there, along with folks from the city of Anita and a bunch of ODOT and some state lawmakers, just to talk about that whole corridor, which included rail. So it was really a good meeting. So it'd be good to have maybe a follow-up with the full board. Commissioner Lyken.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And just real quickly, I was recently talking with the Commissioner Nyquist and soon-to-be former State Representative Olson. And so what I'm being told is that the decision on the reload facility may come as early as this fall, but may end up being as late as early next year. And that's the reload facility that Lynn County is currently the front runner, and I believe we'll end up getting it. But I bring that up because in the application, and we worked very diligently. In fact, Alex and I went up and met with Greg Smith, who's the consultant on the project, and with Lynn County. And one thing that we saw in the application process, again, and I'll make note, because I think this is really important, why supporting this letter is so key, is that in the application, it mentions Coos Bay Rail Link as well as the Port of Coos Bay as one contiguous facility and a collaborative. And so anytime that we can be supportive of the rail link itself and the port, I think in the long run becomes a positive for Lane County as well. And so I may be a short timer, but I'm still very passionate about that project and looking forward to the final decision that will come from ODOT as far as the $25 million and if they're going to give it to the one project, or they actually have the ability to carve it out and give it to one and maybe another one, which I believe it's really down to two. Brooks is the other one. But I am hopeful that they will give either the majority or all of it to the Lynn County project, because frankly, that is not only a benefit for Lane County, it's a huge benefit for Marion County as well. And Marion County's been actively involved in that, in supporting that project as well, because of the benefits involved when you have a facility that is right in between the two largest Class 1 rail lines, and what can potentially be done there. And it's 190 acres or so. I mean, frankly, the positives are significant. And of course, I think we all know that the other 25 million went to Treasure Valley, and that's going to be the one single project on the east side of the state, because we need to get those onions somewhere. And it's more than onions, obviously, but that is a huge, huge piece of the program. So I'm always very supportive of trying to make sure that the rail opportunities are, especially on the bridges and the infrastructure itself. I'm glad you brought up Vaughn. Because, man, you're braver than I would be. I wouldn't ride a bike under that. But anyway, that's beside the point. But I appreciate this letter coming forward. Timing is perfect. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
I think Buster Keaton made a movie about that one, didn't he?
Not quite that one, but any further discussion to the motion? Seeing and hearing none, I'll ask for the vote. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion passes 4-0 with Commissioner Williams excused. So that moves us on to County Council announcements. I know we do not have exec session today. Oh, do you have something further, Alex?
I did. I just wanted to
Okay.
briefly touch on
Going back to legislation.
to follow up on how Administrator Mokryski introduced this item, but we did, I did have the opportunity to travel up to Salem and meet with the governor's staff on the PERS side account issue just on July 2nd. It was just before the 4th. And so just wanted to briefly update you on that meeting. So Christine Moody and I went up. We did meet with Nick Blosser, who's the governor's chief of staff, and Alana Pirtle, who is the governor's, she works on workforce and other policy issues for the governor. In the room, we had representatives from Polk County, Washington County, Multnomah County, Clackamas County, Marion County, Lynn County, Lane County, and AOC. And the conversation ostensibly was supposed to be about, sort of the Comcast settlement and how to dedicate those dollars potentially to the PERS side account. But it really they didn't touch much on the Comcast settlement. More so was how to move forward with creating some energy around getting the legislature to appropriate matching funds for the side account proposal. And what the conversation evolved into were a couple of tools that at least Mr. Blosser wasn't as familiar with, and they have centered around assessment and taxation. So we had a pretty good conversation about the history of CAFA. As you recall, that's the County Assessment Financial Function Assistance Program. And that you, as a board, approve the CAFA grant every year. You're well aware that I think the program was designed to cover about 40% of the assessor's costs with respect to their operations, and it's over the years has really declined to less than 20% of the assessor's costs. So we brought that to his attention, and I think he was particularly intrigued with potentially looking at some reforms for CAFA, because not only does that could provide additional revenue for counties, but it also could provide significantly more revenue for the other taxing districts that the assessor collects for. So that was a really good conversation. We went over some of the historic sweeps from the CAFA fund from the legislature that were never reinstated. And we talked a little bit about how we've done some work with respect to assessors. Commissioner Lakin, your name came up with respect to the Southwestern Oregon Assessors Group and how we worked to try to provide some new ways of doing things amongst those people. The other thing that came up was the very old County Services Task Force that came about when the timber dollars were really declining, and looking at that document again. The other thing that Mr. Blosser was less aware of was the idea of what it means for a county to be in fiscal distress. And if you'll recall, we were one of the counties on the list of not fiscally distressed counties, but counties to monitor by the Secretary of State. So there were a couple of things that we brought to his attention, and I think we'll sort of see what happens next from that meeting, but it was a good opportunity for counties to be directly in front of the governor's staff. I know the association, I think, has an agreement with the governor's office to sit down with the governor 4 times a year to discuss county issues, but it was a good opportunity for us to get to know Mr. Blosser a little bit better, and for him to hear about our issues. So hopefully we can build on that relationship and bring some additional attention to this issue.
And just one additional comment there, you may have seen, I forwarded to the commissioners the email that I sent to Mr. Blosser in response to trying to set that meeting up. I was out last week, so I wasn't able to go, and Alex and Christine did a great job of filling in there. And my message was, you know, the governor's requested that counties contribute their funds from the Comcast settlement to the PERS side account. And, you know, for my part, I said, I think that's actually a good idea. Our board would have to approve that, but, you know, I would recommend that to the board, but not unless the state fully funds the side account, that unless they fully fund it at the level that they committed it to, it makes it really difficult for us to pursue that initiative. So, you know, my view is that the governor deserves, and the legislature deserve credit for proposing the PERS side account and funding it at 25%. That was a good tool. It provides a good tool to local governments and taxing entities to reduce to incentivize the reduction in PERS costs, but it's not a viable program unless they actually fund the 25%. So I think that I just want to share that with the board again, that I think we're in a position to, again, I don't want to preempt whatever the board's decision on the Comcast settlement amount would be. I believe the amount was a little over $1 million for Tulane County that we would receive. So we've already committed $8.2 million tentatively, or in theory, towards the PERS side account, and the board still has to approve that. But we've said, you know, we also have to get the state's 25% of $2.1 million. So adding the PERS, the Comcast settlement money, again, I think makes sense, and I think it's, I would think that the board would seriously consider that, but we really need the governor and the legislature to step up. So pleased to hear about the CAFA discussion. I think that creates another opportunity for us to highlight a significant funding shortfall, and something that the state has not really done its job at calling attention to at the level that they need to. So I'm glad that this meeting turned into that opportunity, and would just encourage the commissioners to continue to advocate with our legislators and contacts at the state to pursue this initiative.
We are, just to add on that, we are expecting the PERS board to be, they're undertaking some rulemaking with respect to getting some of the details around the side account built up, and we think that's going to occur in October. So we've got that on our radar screen to be watching, and it may be that we'll be back in front of the board with some comment to those rules at that time.
Great, thanks. Commissioner Sorensen?
I just want to mention that Mr. Blosser is a pretty bright guy. He graduated from Stanford with a degree in aeronautical engineering, and he took over the management of the family winery, the Sokol Blosser Winery. He's got some insight on county issues because his wife is the chair of the Multnomah County Board of Commissioners. So, and Bill Blosser, his father, was at some points in history pretty involved with the state of Oregon's government. So it's a pretty established family up there. I think it's really great that after starting the Oregon Business Association, he's gravitated himself into government. So I'm glad to see you made that connection. It's a really important connection.
Thanks, Alex. So county council announcements, there's no exec session today, and I don't believe there are any other announcements on county council.
I don't believe so.
So we're to commissioners' business and announcements. Commissioner Farr.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'd put my hand up first before Alex leaves. That last exchange that we just had, I thought that was a wonderful exchange in a public meeting that we're able to address current issues as current issues emerge. We don't often have an opportunity to do that, and it was really refreshing to hear things happening as things were happening, basically, so that the public has an opportunity live to hear some of the work that we do on a regular basis that isn't always done in front of the cameras. So thank you, Mr. Kyler, for providing that information. That's all I have on Commissioner's business. Thank you.
Any other announcements? Then we're on to agenda team request or work session requests. Commissioner Farr.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You mentioned earlier in this meeting that you and I spent some time out at Veterans Legacy, out at the Alma camp, the former forest work camp. Veterans Legacy is converting that. They're on a lease with Lane County right now on the property, converting it into what's going to really be a national, is going to gain a lot of national attention because there are no other residential facilities of this type that provide essentially behavioral health counseling and training for veterans who are suffering from reestablishment in society issues, whatever those may be, including PTSD and other issues that veterans are subject to. The question, as they move forward with their funding, they're looking at private sources, they're looking at grant sources, and they're encountering an obstacle from time to time, in fact, more and more, that not having the property deeded to them makes it difficult for them to access some of the funding, some of the larger funding amounts that are available. So my request of the board and of you, Mr. Mokrzycki, is a report back on the timing and the possibility of deeding the former forest work camp to Veterans Legacy in order for them to move more rapidly with the process of converting it into a full 50-bed residential and training facility. So I'm asking for head nods on a work session for that and a report back.
So I'm looking to the board. Commissioner Sorensen.
Yeah, I was just going to say, this is a great example of both a current need that the board should consider, and I'm be in favor of this work session, but it's also an example, as was one of our items in our meeting about transferring ownership of the MLK property to Homes for Good, where it's not really we don't have a real comprehensive capital improvement plan of how to properly manage resources, but it's a present need, and I agree we should have a work session, but I also want to kind of put in the perspective that these decisions can be, they can be good decisions because we're responding to something right now present, but they can also lead to the sale of the half of the lot or a quarter of the lot directly across the street, where we now have a bank right there, because the board at the time, and I wasn't on the board, yes, I wasn't on the board at a time when
long time ago.
the board, when the board decided, well, that was surplus property. And now it's in the middle of maybe some property that could have been used for a courthouse or something else. So, and again, I'm not really interested in revisiting that because that decision was made by other people at another time. But I think that having a process in place like the capital improvement or capital plan would minimize this type of thing, where we're making a decision that obviously looks good in the moment. That's why we're making it. And this property, you know, it's been debated, discussed for 30, 40 years. So I'm in favor of having a work session and discuss the pros and cons. Be very interested in what the value is, because I know, you know, the board narrowly approved this lease as it is, and I'd be interested in hearing some more about the value of the property and how this would all work out.
And thank you, Commissioner Sorensen, for tying that together, because this is the third request for looking at the best use of county-owned property that I've brought forward in the last few weeks. The first one being, well, the one that we approved today being, you know, the behavioral health facility, the supportive housing unit. But the other one being the best use of the armory, which we own, which is really laying fallow at this point in time. And can we use current county assets to actually address the best possible use, and doing it in conjunction with the broader capital improvement plan or a capital plan, as Commissioner Sorensen has talked about a couple of times today, makes a great deal of sense. So I believe you're moving in the right direction. Thank you for entertaining my 3 different county land best use proposals, and really, as we move forward, making the best use of our assets is something that we're all interested in. Thank you.
So I'm going to look to the board. Do I have my 3 head nods? It looks like I have 3 head nods. I'm seeing assent, actually 4. So any other agenda team requests? Any other business for the board this morning?
Just one item, Mr. Chair, and I mentioned that I will be attending the NACO National Conference this weekend, and I'll be making a panel presentation along with the presenter from Honolulu County and a presenter from Milwaukee County on diversion from jail for people suffering from behavioral health issues. And we'll be talking about our FUSE program and other programs. We'll also be carrying forward CFR 42 is moving a little bit closer to fruition in Congress. And I know that I first carried this 4 years ago, and Commissioner Sorensen also carried it a year after that. So it's something that Lane County and the AOC, Association of Oregon Counties, has been interested in moving forward. We may see some traction this weekend. Thank you.
Great, thank you. If there's no other business, then we are going to be recessed until 1:30.
All right.